Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
By the roaring waves of the Pacific Ocean, the music sounds so much sweeter. The observant can hear so much more than by the Atlantic, a sort of low bass undertone which underlies all activity on the coast. Sometimes it sounds like a whale song, other times a low, mournful call. And always, the constant thrum of a consciousness I never imagined existed. Out here, the angles look better, somewhat more natural to me, though never how they once looked. Never how they look to you. In my early 20s I lived by the slate blue waters of the North Carolina coastline. I spent most of my lonely days either attending the theater for bad science fiction movies or walking the boardwalks aimlessly searching for a job in the failing economy. Tourism flagged, and the atmosphere grew so gray and dull it seemed the ocean itself might stop its constant hushing and settle into place with a final sign of surrender. My daytime walks never even yielded odd jobs. The ships coming into port seemed to change from the usual domestically piloted cargo vessel and fishing trawlers to ships piloted by secretive crews which flew no flag. No marks or colors separated them from their counterparts, but a strange sense of the exotic spilled from their decks onto the port docks and crept up the boardwalk. Local shop owners credited it for the failure of tourism. Religious leaders claimed the sailors represented Satan himself, though in the South that kind of talk occurred so frequently that sensible residents ignored it outright. Included in my general boredom and unemployment, I found myself stranded, far from long-gone friends. In a town without hope for romance. The beach attracted a largely middle-aged, working-class crowd, and those parts that didn't play to the family demographic. At the time the town industry imploded, and I knew that even the sparse college students would die off. I began looking for a way out of town. I needed money to leave, and so I haunted the desolate main drag and the boardwalk looking for menial labor. The summer crawled in, hot and stale, and the town baked on the grill of its own streets. By the time peak season ended, almost everyone in town knew they needed to get out. Though it seemed completely unlikely, it turned out that the little trap of a town held only one surprise. And it played its sleight of hand the day before I chose to leave. On a duly hot day which only the Atlantic seaboard can produce, where the sand threatens blisters but the sky remains hazy and off-white. I saw a young woman while walking the boardwalk. She caught my eye for many reasons, from her short-trimmed hair to her slim figure. But mostly I noticed her dark clothing. She wore a black pea coat and dark jeans despite the heat. Coupled with her sunglasses, her outfit gave her the appearance of a person trying to hide. Though the idea seemed absurd in the summer weather. I first saw her walking from the docks, away from the strange sailors that gathered to watch and catcall in a language I couldn't identify. And later when I turned around to try again at every burger hut and surf shop. The first time, I watched her walk until she became a wavering image in the heat. She walked briskly, set straight on her destination, and didn't acknowledge the occasional vendor's call with even a tilt of the head. When she passed again, walking back toward the docks, I thought she might need directions. Jogging lightly, I approached her from the side and tried a greeting. "Hey, do you need some directions?" I asked. She stopped walking and snapped her head around to face me. Though I couldn't see her eyes, I saw the surprise.
"No thank you. Do you live here?"
"Yes, it's not much. Sorry you chose to visit here. It used to be so much."
"Walk with me,"
she said, and resumed her steady pace. We walked in silence for a few minutes, and just as I opened my mouth with some awkward line, she spoke again.
"Who do you know in this town?"
"Nobody." I cast my eyes down at the faded boards.
"Good, I might have something for you."
My curiosity piqued. I watched as she stopped and pulled a paper-wrapped object from her leather bag. Though I couldn't make out its shape, I felt a strange sort of thrumming as soon as it came into my sight. She held it out to me, and I took it.
"Don't unwrap it yet,"
she said coolly as she fastened the clip on her bag. I took my fingers off of the wrapper and put it into my own backpack. "What's in the wrapper?" I asked. She began to answer when a sailor carrying a box bumped into her. The jolt threw her forward and onto the boardwalk. Her sunglasses cracked as they fell from her face. Unfazed, the sailor kept on toward some warehouse, singing in a language I couldn't identify. She, however, looked terrified. Some terrible revelation dawned in her eyes, and she darted nervous looks back and forth before locking her gaze on mine.
"Come here,"
she said, and pulled me down to plant a firm kiss on my lips. The act stunned me enough that I just stared back as she spoke.
"Get out of here. I don't have long. The cut on my arm is from that sailor."
She turned her arm to show me a thin line just beginning to seep blood. It looked like a razor cut. "It's intentional." I opened my mouth to protest, and she began to shudder violently.
"Get out of here,"
she hissed, and immediately her body locked up. I checked quickly for her breath and heartbeat and got nothing. The urge to run overtook me. I stole one last look at her face, and then up and down the now deserted boardwalk. I swear that, even in death, her eyes held some distinct and ongoing terror. Shortly after I got back to my apartment, a summer storm blew strong and fierce. The rain pelting my windows left me with little to do but remember the day's events. I began to worry about the woman. What would happen when the police found her? Would they be able to trace evidence back to me? And what if they found out I had something that belonged to her? That last thought brought me back to the object in my backpack. In my panic, I had briefly forgotten it. I unzipped the pack and pulled it out. As soon as the wrapped object came back into sight, I felt the throbbing again. Curious about its purpose and its importance to the woman, I unwrapped it and set it on my desk. Unwrapped, the object appeared to be a sculpture set on a base. The whole thing stood about 6 inches tall, with an inch-thick base carved of a strange green stone. I say appeared to be because it seemed to defy classification the longer I stared at it. The thrumming now felt like an aura of corruption, a low note which unsettled my stomach and made my head pound. My first glimpse of the object itself revealed a sculpture which I could not see all at once. I first thought of it as an oncoming migraine, but none of the usual visual holes persisted in anything else in the room. When I returned to studying the object, I noticed its strange visual qualities came from its completely alien sculpture. Whatever it meant in the eyes of its artist, the statue on my desk held no coherent meaning to me. Angles both acute and obtuse boiled and rolled across its surface as my eyes tried to follow one line to the other. In some places, I would feel an angle which looked obtuse and concave but pricked my finger as if it were actually acute and convex. Forms occasionally presented themselves in the mess of strange geometry, but became garbled and faded again. Anything I saw in its features I attributed simply to the same effect which causes one to see images in television snow. As I stared at the object, I became very aware of the thrumming as it grew in intensity and eventually dropped out of the audible range, until I could only feel the note in my body. It caused such nausea that I dropped to the ground and dry wretched at the floor. As I watched, the floor began to crack apart. I scrambled to the edge of the room and watched in frozen terror as the very ground cracked open at the pulsing hum now filling the air. The floorboards splintered across the middle of the room, up the plaster walls, and split the rafters across the ceiling. Whatever force pulled them apart wrought enough damage to break the entire building down the middle. On my first-floor apartment, I watched the rain from the roof 3 floors above pour down into the gaping black hole in the ground. The whole cataclysm lasted no longer than 10 seconds, and at the end of the cracking and thundering structural damage, only the rain made a sound. I walked up to the chasm and looked into its impossible depths. I cannot tell the extent of that abyss, but I know that it did not come from this earth. It felt as if a stitch in reality had burst, leaving me to look into nothing beyond. And in that nothing, something moved. A giant eye wreathed in tentacles clambered up out of the blackness. Its clawed tentacles dug into unseen walls as it propelled itself ever forward. 4 teeth protruded from its amoebic body and sunk into its eye and purple wounds. Its roar was the deep, catastrophic groan of a massive, collapsing structure. Immediately upon this sight, I blacked out. I came to my floor, sirens sounding all around. The apartment had collapsed, but the hole had sealed. Across from me, the statue stood on the floor. I could make it out perfectly, a beautifully rendered sculpture of the creature from within the chasm. All other angles and lines in the world began to roll over each other, to roil like the statue had before. When the paramedics came and put me on the stretcher, I could not make out their faces. Their voices sounded alien and distant. When I tried to speak, one of them noted that I sounded like one of the foreigners from the docks. Before they loaded me onto the ambulance, I saw a firefighter stoop to pick up the object. Then the doors closed. After my release, I made my way through the strange landscape of the real world to the Pacific coast, where that thrumming grew almost as strong as when reality tore before me. It is the sound of impending and profound cataclysm. And I have no doubt that once the creature finally reaches our world, the music will be all the more beautiful.
I apologize for coming in with something unrelated, but on the subject of wild spirits, is anyone familiar with a spirit that has the body of a man and the head of a deer? A stag, specifically? I posted last year about a night terror I had with one looming over me, and during the hurricane last year another family member had an eerie similar experience. And for the first time since I was 8, I had sleep paralysis the other night. No figments, hags, or whatever, but I'm wanting to read into this sort of entity more now, if it's a thing that isn't specific to just me and, now, my cousin. I live in a rural part of the South. When I was young, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents', often staying the night. Their land is thickly wooded, with only the house, the homes of nearby family members, and the dirt road leading away from the property being what you'd describe as clear. I loved it there, and still do even though I rarely visit, especially now that my grandfather has passed. My grandfather had a ritual. He would stay up till 12, and then he would leave the house to go around the property and check on the dogs, make sure his shed was still locked, etc. He would come back, lock the door, and go to sleep. He had never deviated from this routine. I can still picture where I lay in the house. The couch I slept on when I stayed over jutted out and away from the wall, creating a narrow aisle when entering the door, with a wall on one side and the back of the couch on the other. It was with me laying on the couch, able to see the open door clearly, that the thing stood over me. It hadn't crossed around the couch, but loomed over the back of it, not threateningly, but like it was watching me. It had the body of a man, shirtless, and I don't remember if it was muscular or anything. I was 8 or 9 at the time, and I didn't really think in those terms, but thinking back on it, I do want to say that it was probably what you'd describe as toned. It had the head of a stag, I remember that clearly. I can't tell you what kind of rack it had, just that it definitely had antlers, and I'm wondering now how it even fit through the doorway, to be honest. I was definitely afraid. I can't say that I wasn't. I don't think it was threatening. I never mentioned the incident to my grandparents. I didn't want to think about it, but not for the reason you might think. I was 8, so it wasn't like I was worried they'd think I was crazy. Rather, I remember being confused. To this day, I don't like thinking about what I felt then, but it was essentially like I was questioning myself and what I was. I had a big disconnect with being human. I specifically recall wondering if I had dreamt my life, and when I'd wake up. It was a strange experience, and a fleeting one, because I had pretty much forgotten about the confusion for years. Cue the hurricane last year. I hadn't been to my grandparents to stay for a while. By then, my grandfather had passed, but, traditionally, when a hurricane happens, the whole family gets together, extended and otherwise, at my grandparents'. So that's what we did. I want to stress that I hadn't even thought about my experience. It wasn't until my cousin woke up screaming, with the door wide open, that I began to recall what I had experienced. Mind you, I'm not saying I subconsciously blocked them either, I had just forgotten them. Anon/X/ asked me back when I first gave my experience to get in touch with her, and I did, but she was pretty tight-lipped about what she saw. Only that someone had come in. Nothing really worth pressing her on. But lately, I've been having some pretty terrible sleep, waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes with sleep paralysis. It hadn't been a full-blown night terror yet, but still. Thing is, I live right next door to my grandparents now. Hence the curiosity, and that nagging voice in the back of my head wanting to make connections. Anyways, some background, my great-grandmother was Native. My family's never been particularly into Native culture though. Nobody is going to confuse me for being Native, although I've got a pretty good natural tan going on, same as my brother. For the most part, the look hasn't really sprung up after my maternal grandmother and her twin. I've done some minor looking into what I might have seen, if it wasn't just a hallucination, and I've seen similar spirits mentioned, but never really named. That's my story, nothing amazing or anything, but the experience has me curious. This wasn't as brief as I thought it'd be. Anyways, if anyone has any leads, I'd appreciate them. Also, this is literally the only thing I've ever experienced in my life. No ghosts or aliens, although plenty of family members have had stories to tell about their experiences.
I had this terrible nightmare almost on a daily basis. Problem is I can't remember what it was about, I don't remember it. But I can tell that it was the same exact nightmare. When I grew up it disappeared until I was like 13 and I had it again, then disappeared again until today, no sign of it. I think it must be related to a trauma or something. I always woke up all sweaty, with heavy breathing, and it felt like I was about to die every single time. It really was awful. I wonder what it was.
Did it involve sort of falling into eternity and or infinitely sized Pythagorean solids that expand on forever? I used to have a terrifying dream like this when I was a kid that kept reoccurring but sort of stopped around puberty.
Holy shit, dude, yes, the second one. I recall seeing something that was just huge and kept expanding like forever. Although, I do remember that I couldn't see them as a whole, just tiny parts of them just because of how big the shape was. What's this about?
The Pythagorean Nightmare. /x/ birthed a new item for the iceberg tears in this thread. But the terrifying thing is just how relatable reading these 3 posts together is. I got a chill. Pretty sure I've had this dream quite intensely as a child. The best way to describe my version of it is, imagine a screened porch. The kind from the 90s onward, that's really easy to see through, but it's basically a black net with tiny holes where even most bugs can't get in. In my dream I am looking out the back porch of the house I grew up in, and all of a sudden, every single little black net hole spawns to life a moderate-sized light bulb, some red, some yellow, some orange, but because the bulbs are trying to manifest right next and atop one another in space, each one clatters and clangs and explodes together in the loudest noise as my field of vision is engulfed with these bulbs, energy whirring and dream waking me up screaming. I had this dream when I was very young. Not sure what years. It's been a long time since, but it threatens me here and there.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Be Une. Have problems with psychology-related subjects. Meet guy from other career during psychology classes. He's quite smart and agrees to help me. Become bros. Fast forward 4 years. Still in touch. Guy tells he needs help with his thesis. Me not well versed in that field of sciences. He tells me it's okay. He needs a test subject. Nope, not me. He needs an animal. Since he's close friend, decide to help. Find reasonably healthy stray dog. Give it to him. He thanks me and rushes inside. Next month he asks for another one. What? Requires it for more tests. Find dog. Deliver dog. This repeats for the next couple of months. Decide to go with him to see why does he need so many dogs. He leads me to a room in his house where the last dog was. Weird boxes with LEDs on the inside turning on and off in a cycle with a speaker with monotone sounds. Ask about the boxes. He says they are for the dogs. Conditioning the subjects before inducing hypnosis. He says he can induce self-awareness into any living being with a brain complex enough. He sedates the dog and on a table starts connecting some gizmo into its neck and the back of its head. Some time later, aside from the stick to its head, the dog seems alive and well. Help him recording the whole thing. He exposes the dog to the box for 3 hours every day and sedates it once it's over. He decides to lengthen the time of exposure slowly till we end with the animal stranded to that for 48 consecutive hours. The animal is sedated again. He removes the device. Next day he moves it to a soundproof room with basic geometrical shapes painted on the walls in black and white. With food, water and a bed for the dog. We go to another room with video feed from the dog room. It seems disoriented. Starts looking at the walls. The dog starts howling as if something was attacking it while it tried to stand on its hind legs. Falling several times. The dog gets louder and louder. Starts running at the walls and hitting its head till the wounds of the surgery start bleeding again. In the middle of the floor, the poor dog starts convulsing in the floor. I feel sick after all that. I started to feel I didn't know that guy as well as I thought. He tells me doesn't matter what or who he tries to wake up, it always ends like this. Didn't ask, just heard the whole thing and acted as if I was not sickened by the idea of people having to go like that. Poor mutt. I stormed away from there. Next year I lost contact with him. No clue about where he was and didn't want to see him again. There were rumors about self-end animals in small towns near the place where I met him. It went from cats letting themselves fall headfirst into the floor to horses running directly towards trucks and random reports of wild animals walking into the lakes to drown themselves.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.